Is it possible to ramp out our game plan using treasure tokens, and then use those tokens to pump up our creatures, all on a budget of no rares and mythics? Because that is the purpose of today's video. Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, join me once again as we continue to make our way through the Basically series. For those that don't know, this is a series of decks that I put together that will not require you to use a single rare or mythic to build. Yes! That's right, so without further ado, join me in the Brawl format as we continue our dual colored decks with a deck today that I'm calling Basically Kalain. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So basically, Kalain is going to be a Rakdos deck of utilizing black and red. You're looking at an average mana curve of about 2.4, and we'll be rocking a total of 25 creatures in the deck, 12 instants, 12 sorceries, 20 artifacts, 3 enchantments, and 36 lands. Basically, Kalain is going to be a deck where we're going to try to take advantage of getting a bunch of treasures onto the battlefield to help us do some pseudo ramping, but this time, unlike previous deck techs, we actually want to abuse our treasures as much as possible. The reason being, and we'll need to look at the card as we explain this, is Kalain here wants us to pump up our creatures, but we can only do that with treasures. As the card reads right here, Kalain Reclusive Painter is a Rakdos card of black and red. It's a 1/2 legendary creature, human elf bard. When it enters, you get to create a treasure token. Other creatures you control will enter for an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each mana from a treasure spent to cast them. In other words, the more treasures we have and the more we use them, the more we can pump up our creatures as they enter the battlefield. These will make them very hard for our opponent to deal with, and we can save up on mana to utilize them to cast other creatures and hopefully overwhelm our opponent with big stuff that can get a bunch of extra damage. If this game plan, however, does not work out in any way, shape, or form, we can simply burn out our opponent by then triggering off a bunch of other creatures that take advantage of artifacts entering the battlefield. So now that we have some context as to what our commander is trying to do, we'll break down our deck, of course, into 3 separate categories. First off, everything that they can generate for us treasures. Second category will be those that benefit from popping treasures and all kinds of payoffs utilizing them. And then finally, a category for the general catch-all support for the deck. Starting, of course, with the 1-drop slot and the 2-drop slot here, we'll talk about Greedy Freeboater. It dies, you can scry 1 and create a treasure token. We'll also have Shambling Gas here. If it dies, you can either choose to give a creature -1/-1 or create a treasure token. Goldhound itself actually is a treasure itself and can do some early game damage, or you can just simply pop it to use it as a treasure when you need to. Reckless Lackey here, also some early game damage with First Strike and Haste. You can also pay 3 to then draw a card and create a treasure token with it. Strike It Rich literally will just create for us a treasure for 1, and you can flash it back for 3 mana to create another treasure token. Dire Fleet Hoarder here, when it dies, also generates for us a treasure token. Fake Your Own Death here gives one of our creatures a +2/+0 pump. When it ends up dying, however, bring it back to the battlefield to use it again and also generate a treasure token. Horde Robber here, anytime we'll deal combat damage with this creature, we can then generate treasures. Thieves Token, when it enters, creates for us a treasure. You can then equip this equipment to a creature and then it becomes unblockable as long as its power is 3 or less. Treasure Dredger here, pay 1 life and also pay for 1 to generate treasures when you need to. Ancestor's Aid, similar to, of course, the Fake Your Own Death, give yourself an extra +2/+0 pump until give First Strike until end of turn. However, the creature doesn't have to die, and you'll still get the treasure just the same. Enterprising Scallywag here is a little trickier to use here. You have to trigger Descend in order to create a treasure token with it. As a reminder, Descend just simply means that anytime a permanent card is put anywhere into your graveyard from wherever it may be, whether it is on the battlefield or if it's in your hand. Piggy Bank here, when it ends up dying, you also generate a treasure token. River's Requisitioner, similar to Piggy Bank here. Also, when it dies, you can generate a treasure token, or you can at least pay it for the blitz cost of 3 if you want to make it hasty. Wily Goblin also enters and generates for us a treasure token. Buried Treasure itself literally is an actual treasure. You just simply sacrifice it, or later on, you can exile it from your graveyard for 5 to discover for 5. You can activate that, however, only at sorcery speed. Collector's Vault, one of the best options for us here, where you can use this to simply just draw cards and discard cards, and you get to create treasure tokens along the way. Gleaming Barrier here, when this wall dies, you can also generate a treasure token. And then finally, in the 2-drop slot, we'll have Mimic here as an actual treasure itself, similar to, of course, the Buried Treasure. Sacrifice it when you need to, or simply turn this into an artifact creature that's a 3/3 until end of turn when you need it to. Moving into the 3 and 4 drop slot here for treasure generation, we also have Heartless Pillage here. If we trigger Raid with it, we create a treasure token. This also will allow us to discard 2 cards from our opponent. Skullport Merchant here, when it enters, you get to create a treasure token, sacrifice another creature or a treasure to draw a card with it. Undercity Scourge here wants our creatures to die. If a creature does die, we can use it to tap to generate a treasure token. Exhibition Magician here. When it enters, you can either create a citizen token or a treasure token. Flick a coin here, 1 damage to any target, generate a treasure token, and draw a card. Improvised Visionary here, deal 2 damage to any target, and then generate a treasure token. Redcap Thief, when it enters, just simply makes a treasure. Seize the Spoils, you have to discard a card, but then you can draw 2 cards and create 1 treasure token. Swarm of Moria here will create for us 2 tokens, one is a Mass Orcs 2, and the other will be the treasure token. Magic Pot here, this Goblin Construct, when it dies, you create a treasure token, or you can utilize its secondary ability to exile a card from a graveyard. Pitiless Plunderer here, also anytime another creature we control dies, we get to trade a treasure token. Young Red Dragon here has adventure and is also a dragon. It's a 3/1 flyer, but also you can pay the instant adventure side to generate 1 treasure. Big Score here, and also Unexpected Windfall do the exact same thing. Instant speed, 4 mana, you have to discard a card. You can then, however, draw 2 cards and create true treasure tokens. Corvold and a Noble Thief here is one of our sagas. For the first 2 parts, you generate a treasure token, and then the third part, exile the top 3 cards of your opponent's library, and then you can choose to play those cards. And then finally, to round out our 4 drops here, Stormkiln Artist here. A very powerful card for us. This Dwarf Shaman will get a +1/+0 pump for each artifact we control, and with its Magecraft ability, anytime we cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can generate another treasure token. Moving on now to our treasure payoffs for the deck, we'll have Fatal Push at the top here. You actually don't need a treasure to actually use this spell. However, you get more value out of it if you can trigger the revolt by popping a treasure token. We have Hyperblade here, gives one of our creatures an equip cost of an extra +3/+1 pump. However, if we trigger Void by making one of our treasures leave the battlefield, you can immediately attach this to another creature at your choosing. Vat of Rebirth here, anytime another artifact or creature we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. Once you have 4, you can then pay 3, tap Vat of Rebirth to bring back a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Gleeful Demolition here, you can destroy a target artifact an opponent controls, but if you destroy one of your own, you get to create 3 1/1 Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. Godotha Rebirth kind of does the same thing, however in reverse, you have to sacrifice your own artifact no matter what. Either way, you still get the benefit of 3 1/1 Goblin creature tokens. Dowsing Device here, when this artifact enters or another artifact we control enters, you get to give a creature +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. Flip this once you have 4 or more artifacts we control on the battlefield into Geo Grotto here, which becomes a land. You can tap for red, or pay 3 and tap this to give another creature an extra +X/+0 pump, where X is the number of artifacts we control. Dragonspark Reactor here is also another one of our great payoffs for the deck. When this artifact enters, or another artifact we control enters, put a charge counter on the artifact. Once you have enough, you can then sacrifice this artifact at instant speed and deal damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player, and that much damage to target creature. A great payoff once we have a critical mass of artifacts on the battlefield. If we want to do some incremental damage here, we have Reckless Fireweaver. Anytime another artifact we control enters, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Yotia Declares War here is one of our sagas. First off, on the first part, create an Ornithopter. Part 2, tap any number of artifacts we control and then deal that much damage to a creature or planeswalker. And the final part here will then convert any one of our artifacts we control into a 4/4 until end of turn. Cranial Ram here is a living weapon. It creates a 0/0 Phyrexian Germ and then give the equipped creature an extra +X/+1 pump, where X is the number of artifacts we control. Oni Cult Anvil here, another great option for us is to sacrifice extra artifacts we control to turn them into constructs. Once you actually get 1 construct out, you can actually keep sacrificing the same construct if you just want to do incremental life gain and drain. Popular Egoist here, anytime we sacrifice another permanent, we can then drain our opponent for 1, and we also can gain 1 life. You can also sacrifice a creature or enchantment if you need to give this indestructible until end of turn. Wefstalker Ardent here, similar to our Reckless Fireweaver, is also going to be a 2/3. You can actually warp it in for 1, and anytime another creature or artifact we control enters, deal 1 point of damage to each opponent. Mayhem Devil here, similar to also Popular Egoist here, however anytime any permanent is sacrificed, you can deal 1 damage to any target of your choosing. And then finally we have Mirkwood Bats here. Anytime we create a token or sacrifice a token, we can drain our opponent for 1 life. And then rounding out our package, of course, will be the general support for the deck. We have some removal with cards like Bloodchief's Thirst and Bone Shards here. We have Clockwork Percussionist here, mostly just additional utility. You can use this as a sack outlet. Either way, it can replace itself by exiling the top card of our library, and we can play that card until the end of our next turn. We'll have additional removal with Feed the Swarm here, but mostly you want to utilize this to then destroy target enchantments. Similar to a Braid, it can either be going to a creature for 3 damage, but mostly again you want to use it to destroy an artifact. We'll also have Cathartic Pyre here, 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, or simply use this to then discard some cards to draw that many cards. Demand Answers here, same thing. You can discard a card to draw 2 cards, but ideally sacrifice an artifact instead to get better value out of it. Arcane Signet, because we are a multicolored deck and we do need a mana rock, so this is a staple. Boggart Trawler here is going to be just a free roll for us. You can either use this as a land in a pinch, or if you play it as a goblin, when it enters, exile an opponent's graveyard. We have Withering Torment here, can be utilized either to destroy a creature or an enchantment, and we'll lose 2 life. Litho Breaking here, one of our low-end wraths here in this deck, create a lander token, and then once we do, sacrifice a different artifact, or you can actually sacrifice the lander itself, and then when we do, deal 2 damage to each creature. Sundering Eruption here is going to be our targeted land hate, or you can use it as an actual land in a pinch if you need to. And then finally, on the top end of our curve here will be Ticket Booth. This enchantment room can either be on one side to use it as Manifest Dread, or the Tunnel of Hate side allows you to then give a target attacking creature double strike until end of turn. As far as your land base is concerned, it's pretty much going to be the hodgepodge of everything we can afford on a budget. So we'll use Bojuka Bog here as, again, a targeted exiling for graveyards. We'll have 8 swamps and 9 mountains. We'll have some additional artifact lands with Wealth of Whispers here and Great Furnace. Dwarven Mine will create for us a Dwarf Treasure token as long as we control 3 or more mountains. We'll also utilize all the tapped dual lands we can afford, such as Bloodfilled Caves, Dross Force Bridge, Foreboding Ruins, Jagged Barrens, Razor Tap Gorge, and Tramway Station. Tramway Station actually can also be sacrificed to draw a card as we need to in the late game. And then finally, to round out our package will be all of our utility lands. So we'll have Command Bridge here. You have to sacrifice it unless you tap an untap permanent we control. We'll have Command Tower. That's a staple for any kind of commander deck. Demolition Field, again, for targeted non-basic land hate. And our fetch lands will be Escape Tunnel, Evolving Wilds, Maestro's Theater, and Volatile Fault can also take out another artifact non-basic land, but also creates for us a treasure token, which is good for us. And to round out our package here will be the Gold Saucer. This land, of course, will allow us to tap for colorless, or you can pay 2 to flip a coin, and if we win the flip, we can generate additional treasure tokens. Later on, sacrifice any additional 2 artifacts to draw a card. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Now that we finally got through the main part of that, let's cover the tips and tricks I can give you to get the most value out of this deck. So, in the early part of the game, start accumulating your treasures, or if you cannot do that, just try to put down early game threats to then ping away at your opponent's life total, so make it easier for you to close out the game once we get some of our game ending threats. Your early game threats will be cards such as your Greedy Freeboater, your Shambling Ghast, and Reckless Lackey will help you again ping away little by little. However, once we get to a certain point in the game where they really can't do any more damage, either because your opponent has bigger threats out, hold back on them and try to get extra value by having them chump block some of your opponent's bigger threats. Remember that cards like Greedy Freeboater and Shambling Ghast, when they die, you can then convert them into treasure tokens, which again is part of our game plan. Once we get to the mid part of the game, start amassing even more treasures as you keep progressing. This means that once your other creature spells are cast, you can then utilize those treasures and pop them off to make them very big threats against your opponent, making them also very difficult for them to handle what we're trying to do. In theory, as an example, cards such as Mayhem Devil can not only ping away at your opponent as you're sacrificing those treasures, but if you can bring it in utilizing treasures, it theoretically, for 3 mana, can become a 6/6, which is a great and fast clock against any opponent. Don't be afraid to sacrifice some of your key pieces to activate your abilities and get even more treasures out of the deck. Cards that'll help you out with this, such as Enterprising Scallywag, of course, will generate tokens as you descend. Cards that end up dying, such as Piggy Bank, will leave behind treasure tokens, and they are also artifacts themselves, which of course trigger off other abilities such as Webstalker Ardent, or again your Reckless Fireweaver as you keep pinging away when those treasures enter the battlefield. Once we get to the late game, one of your win cons should at least be in your hand by this point, or at least on the battlefield, so that you can close out the game very quickly out of nowhere. Those cards that are going to help you out with that will be your room cards such as Tunnel of Hate. Remember that card, when you start attacking, can give a creature double strike until end of turn. Or additional cards that can help you with pump, such as Dowsing Device, flipped into Geo Grotto, can allow you to then pump up one of your bigger creatures and making it very hard for your opponent to beat. Or a simple creature such as Stormkiln Artist will get an extra +1/+0 pump, as I mentioned earlier, for each artifact we control. This will lead us to one of the 3 major advantages our deck has. And the first major advantage our deck has is we are very good at ramping with our game plan. I know, of course, our treasures are only temporary, but we have plenty of ways of getting out those treasures, whether it's sacrificing creatures, just generating them by casting spells, sometimes discarding cards and drawing cards. But no matter how you look at it, we have plenty of ways of ramping out our game plan. Even if Kalain doesn't hit the battlefield, we still have plenty of ways of just casting everything we need when we need it. This now will lead us to the second major advantage our deck has. We are, of course, a very flexible type of deck. Even though we look like a giant pile of treasures, we have many ways of taking advantage of them and being either super aggressive with them with early game threats. We could sacrifice some of those creatures for value to generate more treasures, and sometimes we can also go super big by just making one of our threats either massive with treasures we're sacrificing, or we could just ping away as we generate treasures at our opponent's life total little by little and staying on the defensive. And this will now lead us to the final major advantage our deck has, which is, if you haven't already noticed, we don't care if our creatures live or die. I know, we're not technically a sacrifice deck, but we actually kind of are. It's just in a slightly different way, so hear me out for a moment here. If you haven't already noticed, of course, several creatures in our deck, if they do die, they end up generating treasures for us. And if you haven't already noticed, we already, of course, have several cards in the deck that can generate more value if we do sacrifice artifacts or creatures. So with that, as we keep sacrificing our treasures back and forth, not only will we have the ramp we need, but we'll also be able to utilize that ramp to either give our creatures the buff as I mentioned earlier, or again, just keep casting more and more spells as we churn through our deck, overwhelming our opponent with the major value we have, even though this is just simply a budget deck. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for us. We do have to acknowledge the major downsides to playing a deck like this. And one of the major downsides is, because we're so reliant on treasures, even though we can ramp out a ton of them, we have to be very good at managing our resources. So hear me out for a second here. Even though I did praise the fact that the deck has no problem generating treasures, there are going to be some moments where you don't want them to be popped because you need them in order to get extra pump and value out of the deck. Some of your win cons completely rely on keeping treasures out instead of popping them, such as Stormkiln Artist, again, will not get bigger unless you actually have a bunch of artifacts out. Dousing the Device cannot give your creatures a big pump unless if there's a bunch of artifacts on the field. So knowing when to pop them to get either bigger value for some of your creatures or popping them to then generate more card draw is going to be a bit tricky for a deck like this, even though we are only at a budget level. The next major downside to our deck is, and it's a much more obvious one, we are again very susceptible to anybody who has a lot of artifact hate. So if any opponent out there can blow away our treasure tokens and our other artifacts, then your deck is going to feel very sad. You won't really get a chance to do much with Kalain and his ability if your opponent can keep artifacts off of the battlefield throughout the whole game. And our other major disadvantage to the deck is, anything that involves life gain or big creatures will also make us feel very sad. So keep in mind that while we can make our own creatures naturally bigger with Kalain, we have to rely on Kalain staying on the battlefield, and we have to have a steady stream of treasures in order to cast creature spells to make them big threats versus our opponent. Some of your opponents out there can just naturally have bigger creatures than us and can overwhelm us with cards that have trample, or sometimes they have flyers, or if they have faster life gain that we can ping them away, then your deck feels like it's just going nowhere. So please keep these things in mind if you're interested in this style of deck. Weaknesses aside, if you still like today's deck, or maybe you're interested in seeing what else you can do in this deck archetype, as always, I will show you on screen right now a couple of quick snapshots of previous deck techs we've done in the Rakdos colors of black and red. Please check out any one of those if you're interested in seeing what else you can do in Rakdos or treasures in general. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give you on this deck. If you're a fan of artifact strategies, if you're a fan of ramping with treasures, and if you're a fan of playing a deck that can sometimes get sneaky wins out of nowhere utilizing some of the abilities of other cards, then I would definitely say give this deck a try. And I assure you, once you manage to amass a huge amount of treasure tokens to pop off and go big or go wide, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised at how you can pull it off on today's budget. And whether you use them to make your creatures big or you just burn out your opponent, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.